You remember this guy. He was big on the show last time at the very top because he gave us a good scare. Mike Lawler. As you can see, AIPAC's $590,000 man. That's right. Now, $590,000 is not the most AIPAC has ever paid to a member of Congress, far from it, or a president for that matter. But that is as of November of 2024, at which point he had only been in Congress for about 21 months, 22 months, whatever, 23 months. One less than 2 years, because he was elected to Congress in the mild red wave, shall we say, of 2022. So 590 grand, not a terrible amount by Washington standards, which tells you a lot about our wonderful government, but certainly a lot for only 2 years. And he is trying his best to earn his keep, but he's in a swing district, so he is struggling a bit. We showed this video about a week ago where we covered one of his raucous town halls. So he has been racking up the L's lately, putting the L's in Lawler, as I say.
Corporations and the ultra wealthy, the tariffs that are going to make everything more expensive for us, kidnapping and deporting 2-year-olds who have cancer and sending them off. My question to you, none of this is helping us. We're getting hurt.
There's not a single local elected official who can honestly say that I have not sat down with them and worked with them regardless of their party. There's not a single one of my Democratic colleagues in the Congress who would say that I don't do
answering the question.
When it comes to...
So there you have it. Yeah, he has been having a rough go of it, but doing his best for AIPAC. He was all set to introduce this bill, H.R. 867, the IGO Anti-Boycott Act, sponsored by Representative Mike Lawler, which imposes fines of up to $1 million and or prison sentences up to 20 years for Americans participating in boycotts of Israel or its settlements if these boycotts are endorsed by international bodies like the UN or the EU. Here is the text of the bill. It's a very short bill since this is basically an expansion of an already existing and already horrible and terrifying anti-boycott bill. We've had anti-boycott legislation in this country going back to the 70s, but the summary is available on congress.gov. This bill expands an existing anti-boycott law to include certain boycotts imposed by international governmental organizations, or IGOs. Current law prohibits various actions by U.S. persons, individuals, or entities in relation to boycotts imposed by foreign governments on a country which is friendly to the United States and that is not itself the object of a U.S. boycott. This bill applies those prohibitions to similar boycotts imposed by IGOs. So it used to be the case if a hostile country, Russia, Iran, were boycotting Israel, that it was a criminal. It was a crime, rather. It was a criminal act to participate in that boycott along with a country that is hostile to Israel. This, of course, expands that to international organizations. So prohibited actions include refusing to do business with companies organized under laws of the boycotted country if the refusal is pursuant to an agreement with or request from the country or IGO imposing the boycott, refusing to employ any U.S. person on the basis of race, religion, sex, or national origin. I'll have to run that by Matt Walsh. I understand he was against this for that reason. And furnishing information about whether someone is associated with charitable or fraternal organizations that support the boycotted country. The bill also requires the president to annually submit to Congress and make available to the public a report describing these boycotts and listing the foreign countries and internal organizations involved in fostering or imposing them. So here are the lists of some high-profile IGOs: African Union, NATO, Asian Development Bank, Caribbean Community, Interpol, Commonwealth, International Labor Organization, OPEC, the World Bank, of course, the United Nations, the European Union, the International Criminal Court. So these are organizations that now, if they organize a boycott and you join that boycott and you promote that boycott, you could be held liable criminally, fined, and or imprisoned. Well, I shouldn't say now. I should say in Mike Lawler's world, you would be. But thankfully, this got resistance mostly from the right wing. Oddly enough, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene says, I will be voting no. It is my job to defend Americans' rights to buy or boycott whoever they choose without the government harshly fining them or imprisoning them. But what I don't understand is why are we voting on a bill on behalf of other countries and not the president's executive orders that are for our country? Thomas Massey says, I agree with Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'll be voting no on this bill as well. Anna Paulina Luna, a very, very pro-Israel congresswoman, says H.R. 867, up for a vote tomorrow, aims to curb anti-Semitism but threatens First Amendment rights. Americans have the right to boycott, and penalizing this risks free speech. I reject and vehemently condemn anti-Semitism, but I cannot violate the First Amendment. So Thomas Massey, later that day, we're talking about May 4th, so this would be Sunday. This happened while we were on the air Sunday night. Apparently, H.R. 867 has been pulled from the schedule for this week. Thank you for your vocal opposition on this platform. It was a ridiculous bill that our leadership should have never scheduled for a vote. Now, Reason Magazine did a very good write-up on some of the specifics and the implications of this bill. And so I do want to read a bit from it because it gives you some background as well. Should sharing information about Israeli businesses get you 20 years in prison? Tough question for libertarians these days, but Reason brings the perspective.
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Because on the one hand, women's sports. On the other hand, abolishing the First Amendment. Wow. What a dilemma. In response,
on the one hand, access.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Green Party.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So Reason Magazine writes, in response to the Arab League embargo on Israel, the Carter administration adopted export regulations in 1977, banning American businesses from heeding an agreement with, a requirement of, or a request from a foreign government to boycott a friendly third party. Congress tightened the restrictions in 2018, imposing a maximum 20-year prison sentence or $1 million fine for violations. Complying with a boycott includes furnishing information to boycotting countries or even failing to report a foreign boycott request to the U.S. Bureau of Industry and Security. Last year, an American company was fined $151,875 after it didn't tell the U.S. government that its distributor in the UAE wanted it to stop selling to Israel. The IGO Anti-Boycott Act would expand unauthorized boycotts to include campaigns by international institutions like the United Nations or European Union. The preamble to an earlier Democratic-sponsored version of the bill, which failed in 2018, specifically accused the United Nations Human Rights Council of sponsoring a commercial boycott of Israel by publishing a list of businesses that it considered complicit in Israeli rule over the Palestinian territories. That's right. So this is not abstract. The UN has, of course, published papers that say, hey, here's a list of companies that are complicit in the oppression of the Palestinian people. And if we are to interpret this law correctly, in my opinion, obviously, in my opinion, were you to share a link to that report on Facebook, hey, folks, the UN is telling us boycott X, Y, or Z company. Join me and do it. That's a crime, according to this bill.
Well, you know who used to support these kinds of actions? A guy named Russell Brand.
That's right.
He actually supported a big drive to get companies like Barclay with some success to disinvest from Israel. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything, but, a lot of people hypothesize that Epstein was part of an Israeli blackmail ring. And, it's pretty funny that all of a sudden these ancient accusations came up against Brand right at a moment where, as we have demonstrated many times, he started out after October 7th speaking out against the media hypocrisy around Israel.
Well, I think that the reason Lawler is introducing this bill is because he has a hard-on for Russell Brand. He's afraid the assault charges won't stick, so he figures maybe we can lock him up for boycotting Israel. Right, yeah, exactly, yes.
And he's got his own dark past with the egg industry.
Yeah, that's right. International organizations can't get away with targeting our key democratic ally, Israel. That's why we are introducing the bipartisan IGO Anti-Boycott Act to counter the blatant anti-Israel bias in international organizations like the United Nations. Josh Gottheimer, a Democrat, said in a January press release published by Lawler's office. So, yes, this had bipartisan sponsorship in the House, which made it kind of surprising that it failed, but that tells you how far public opinion has shifted. Civil libertarians warn that treating the UN list as a foreign boycott would allow the U.S. government to prosecute Americans for political statements. The IGO Anti-Boycott Act plainly extends to voluntary politically motivated speech seeking to support prescribed boycotts, the ACLU argued in a February 2024 letter to lawmakers. So, yes, this bill was introduced and passed the House easily in 2024, just 1 year ago. Jewish Insider, very upset that the same thing didn't happen this year. So there's some nuggets in this article that I think are worth pointing out as well. House cancels vote on IGO Anti-Boycott Act following right-wing objections. Following online outrage from the right, the House canceled a planned vote on the IGO Anti-Boycott Act, legislation expanding current U.S. anti-boycott laws to include international organizations, despite broad bipartisan support for the legislation last year. The fallout is just one recent example of how actors on the political fringes have mobilized to stymie pro-Israel legislation and bills to combat anti-Semitism that otherwise enjoy bipartisan support, often by misrepresenting their aims and impacts. Yeah, okay. And have amassed sufficient influence to upend that bipartisan consensus and scuttle the legislative process. Actors on the fringes have decided that they want to preserve some semblance of First Amendment rights in this country. Those extremists.
That's really fringe in a country that, whatever the realities, has always fetishized freedom of speech as core to its self-image.
Exactly. Now it's the fringes on the extremes who are embracing that. Bipartisan support for identical legislation last year was so strong that it passed the House by a voice vote in February 2024 after being reported out of the House Foreign Affairs Committee by a 42-3 vote in late 2023. But this year, it's meeting a very different reception. The legislation as written does not ban or criminalize boycotts of Israel by U.S. citizens or companies undertaken outside of compulsory policies by international organizations. All of this is lies. Nor does it punish Americans who do not purchase Israeli goods. Current law specifically states that the mere absence of a business relationship in the boycotted country is not sufficient evidence of a boycott under the law. But some on the right took to X on Sunday to claim otherwise. Now, of course, they can't read your mind and know why you chose not to buy the Manischewitz matzah, which is a product of Israel. But if Manischewitz
is it really?
Yeah, it is. That's disappointing. I heard that. I saw that, though, because during Passover, they had matzah set up. So I looked at Manischewitz. I'm like, is this from Israel? And it turns out it is. What's the one? Schweitz's? That's from New York. So good Jew matzah, Schweitz's bad Jew matzah, Manischewitz. Remember that, kids. But yeah, so if Manischewitz is on a boycott list that the UN puts out and you share a link, hey, on your Facebook page, UN just put out a list of companies to boycott. Manischewitz is one of them. If you were to do that, according to this legislation, you're proactively participating in a boycott put forward, sponsored by an IGO. And that would be a criminal offense under this legislation. So this idea that it doesn't punish Americans who do not purchase Israeli goods, well, of course they can't punish you for the simple act of not doing something. Yeah. But surveillance being what it is, they monitor social media constantly. If they could say,
just
hey,
like tribe hummus better.
Yeah, right, exactly. But if they can prove that you actually promoted a boycott that was initiated by one of these IGOs, then yes, that is a violation. And obviously that is a criminalization of individual Americans based on political choices and expression, most importantly, of those political choices. So here's Lawler doing some damage control now after the bill failed. This bill amends existing law and focuses on institutional pressures, not personal choices, ensuring that Americans are not forced to participate in unsanctioned boycotts. What a slime ball. Oh, we're making sure Americans are not forced to, but nobody is forced to participate in anything. That's not the issue at all. I look forward to leadership bringing this critical legislation to a vote. Well, apparently it's not so critical. Not so critical. And the big story here, the big good news here, is the sea change that obviously, flows underneath this issue. Because this passed so convincingly in 2024, they didn't even take a formal vote. It passed on a voice vote. It cleared committee 42-3 in late 2023. I thought there was no doubt this bill would pass the House. I thought there are clearly enough Republicans and Democrats bought by Israel to get this through the House. The question was whether it was going to clear the Senate, because this is not a budget-related bill, so it would need 60 votes in the Senate to clear the filibuster and get to Trump's desk. The Democratic Senates in 2024 did not take this bill up for a vote. They blocked it. So in my opinion, there was a possibility, although you never know. I mean, you got Fetterman, you got Schumer, you got a whole lot of Zionist Democrats. Yeah. It was a question whether or not this would clear the Senate. In my view, there was very little question that this would clear the House, but it didn't. It didn't. You had a few very high-profile, very right-wing voices speak up and say, we can't do this, and they pulled it. That's a victory. We have a couple stories of this same theme today, because alongside the horrible news of Israel's new Gaza plan, which we'll get to next, there are a couple of victories that the pro-Palestine movement put on the board, and one of them is this. This is clearly an indication that the tide is turning. It's clearly an indication that politicians are thinking twice before passing horrifying free speech violating legislation like this. That's the only real explanation for this, that in 2024, it was 60 days out of October 7th. They felt they had to go here, so they did, overwhelmingly. Just 1 year later, they can't even bring it to a vote. They're afraid to even bring it to a vote because people don't want to go on record trampling your First Amendment rights for Israel, at least not enough of them.
Yeah, well, Spy Magazine did some research tracking members of Congress's cell phone, and they found a correlation between members who voted against this and members who haven't been near a playground in the last 6 months. So that could be part of it, too. That could be part of the reason. I think you're right. I nonetheless, it never went to the full House last year. It seems like Marjorie Taylor Greene would have voted against that anyway.
She probably would have.
Certainly would have voted against that regardless. It does also show you the idea that everything's better if Democrats are in charge is total BS.
Right.
You know, they were confident in that overwhelming support under a Democratic administration. So, yeah, no, you look at this, you look at Lawler, you look at all of these people, and at best, it's the money. It's the money that they're being bribed with. And in a lot of cases, the idea that these people feel this strongly, that Israel being anti-Israel, being pro-Palestine, is by definition anti-Semitic, as dumb as a lot of members of Congress are, there's just no way that an overwhelming number of them actually don't get the distinction. So why do they pretend they don't get the distinction? Money is the most obvious. But I think the blackmail and the threats, I mean, the more you look at this, the more you have to say that is a huge, huge part of it. You know, Israel is a country, even if they don't have anything on you, they would think nothing of planting things on your computer. Like, God knows what you get threatened with. People always go back to when Schumer talked about Trump going after the intelligence services, how they could get to you 7 ways to Sunday. And it's such an iconic moment because he's revealing the way they talk amongst themselves in a candid moment. How do you think they talk about standing up against Israel? Hey, freshman congressperson, you don't want to do that. Do you know what they'll do to you if you vote against this. There's no other explanation. There's no other explanation for Abbott going ballistic about a town voting for a ceasefire. You think Abbott even likes Jewish people? Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So what is he going out? Have you ever seen him go that far out on a limb about anything that did not involve men in the women's room? Ever?
Right.
So why? For what reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true in a number of cases. I think in Lawler's case, ironically, this is one of the issues that he centers because his district is very much a liberal Zionist district. He runs as this big moderate. He touts some of his moderate positions.
He's up by you, right?
Yeah, he's in the Hudson Valley, so he's like Rockland, Westchester. So he was south of where I was, south of where I grew up, just south of where I grew up, quite a bit far south of where I am now. But yeah, those are New York City suburbs. That's Joy Behar country. Those are liberal, rich Zionists. They're not right wing on most other issues, which is why he won that district pretty narrowly. The only reason he won is because Sean Patrick Maloney forced his way in, forced the incumbent out. That was Mondaire Jones's district, who's a massive sellout for Israel because he ran as this squad adjacent progressive, and he's horrible on this issue because his constituents are horrible on this issue. So in this case, the irony is that here you have this quote unquote moderate Republican who's serving a district that he only won on a fluke. Even in a red wave year, he won it on a fluke. You have him using this issue to rally a mostly Democrat Zionist base. It's a very strange situation, but that explains, I think, where he's coming from. I mean, AIPAC gave him $600,000 in 2 years. That's a lot for 2 years. It's not a lot big picture. There are a lot of politicians who get a lot more than that over the course of a career. $600,000 in 2 years, that's a whole lot of money. That's a whole lot of money. And he knows that is an issue, even though he's a Republican. If he's strong enough on Israel, there are a lot of wealthy Democrats in Rockland and Westchester County who I appreciate what he said on it. Basically the Michael Rappaport vote, the deranged never Trump libs who are also just brainwashed Zionists who at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, if the Democrats are perceived as less fanatic Zionist than the Republican, they're liable to switch, just like Rappaport. That's who dominates that district. It's a bunch of Michael Rappaports. And so I think that's where Lawler's coming from. But once again, look at the difference. Last year, this wasn't even a question. It passed 42-3 through committee, and they didn't even take an official vote on it in the House. This year, they couldn't even get it to the floor.
Please clap.